ومكارم أخلاق ترفعنا فوق الآفاق.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. Alhamdulillah, this is our second session of this month dealing with atheism. We had with us last week our dear brother Imran Hussein, and today we have our dear brother Subboor Ahmad. And most of you who deal with Dawah in the West, you probably know both of them, but just for a quick introduction for those of you who don't know our brother Subboor, he specializes in philosophy of science with a focus on Darwin's theory of evolution. He has debated many prominent atheists over the years, including professors, atheist activists, and internet personalities on topics of science, God's existence, and Darwinism. He has given talks across North America, Latin America, Australia, and Africa. Subboor has an MA in PG Cert. He explained that to us, inshallah. It's an abbreviation for something. First time I saw it. Maybe I know, but I don't know the abbreviation. It's in philosophy from the Birkbeck. Is that correct? How I'm pronouncing it?
Yep, Birkbeck. Yep.
Birkbeck College in the University of London. He's currently a PhD candidate specializing in philosophy of biology. So this is his field that he's come to talk about tonight, about Darwinism and also naturalism, inshallah ta'ala. And here's a bit introduction. The brothers have on the screen the same thing I just mentioned now. So without any further ado, shall we turn over to him to inshallah to teach us, inshallah, about this important topic. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Abdurrahim McCarthy. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So in terms of timings, I have about an hour to give or say 45 minutes to give the talk. And then there's going to be half an hour Q&A. Was that the structure?
Yeah, up to you. And the ball's in your court. If you want to take more time for the talk, more time for Q&A, it's all up to you, inshallah. We have an hour and a half for the session. You don't have to go the full hour and a half. It's up to you, inshallah, however you want to spread it out, inshallah.
Okay, so if it's okay with you, what I'd rather do is keep it to about 45 minutes as a talk and then 45-minute Q&A, because it'll be nice to interact with everybody, especially in the Zoom call. It's hard to remain focused unless you're interacting and stuff.
Yeah, inshallah. So if we can get also the brothers and sisters, remind them for the questions. And from the beginning of the lecture and throughout the lecture, if you have any questions, send them to the chat and we'll jot them down and then ask our brother at the end, inshallah ta'ala.
All right, brilliant. Bismillah. So I think where to begin here is in terms of foundations. I think foundations are key. So what are we speaking about here today? We're speaking essentially about a worldview. So when we're referring to scientism, naturalism, and Darwinism, these are distinct worldviews. These are not scientific theories. These are not just some rational positions that someone holds. These aren't set as some sort of philosophical position which is unchallengeable. No, these are actually belief systems. These are worldviews. So there's a few things to iron out right from the onset. Definition can always get a little bit murky as well. So I'm going to be careful how I define things, because there's a popular understanding and an academic understanding. To do is maybe it's good to start off with an analogy. If we look at the world from a purely reductive perspective, purely naturalistic perspective, biology breaks down to chemistry, chemistry breaks down to essentially mathematics. So we can break down everything from that perspective. So these are the way that the sciences are linked. So if we break down this worldview that we're speaking about, there is a sort of chronology. And the chronology I want to begin off with is first off speaking about naturalism. What exactly is naturalism? Then speaking about scientism, then speaking about Darwinism. Now, obviously, you can see a sort of sequence here. Naturalism is the broad brush, if you like, idea of which most atheists hold on to. Then you get scientism, which is a epistemic position, a position that they actually hold about how they look at the world. And then Darwinism is a particular theory which has been hijacked and turned into a particular world view from the new atheist perspective. So that's the broad brush sort of picture. Now, What is naturalism? Naturalism is the very simple idea that all that actually exists in reality is matter and at bottom processes. So everything can be broken down to essentially matter. So from this, we would have heard people actually speaking about it. So naturalism is essentially the idea that all that there is nature, matter and process.
دين ومكارم وأخلاق ترفعنا فوق الآفاق.
Everything can be broken down to those simple components. Obviously, an atheist is a naturalist. Generally, most atheists are naturalists. You do have some exceptions. There are some people who disagree with that. But generally, an atheist would be a naturalist. So a naturalist would say, there is no creator. There is no God. There is no soul. There are no angels. There are no jinn. There is nothing else beside the natural. So they would reject, obviously, no miracle. They would deny any supernatural aid, any intervention. So that's the broad view of naturalism. Now, naturalism, and this is where we need to be careful. Naturalism is a faith. Naturalism is actually not a position which can be scientifically proven, philosophically proven, mathematically shown to be the case. It is actually faith. It is actually a position which people hold on to. Now, what I like to do throughout my talk is I try to reference academics who do not agree with us theologically. They are agnostic or atheist, but they are candid enough to realize that there is no way that the sort of claims of new atheism can be substantiated. So they would actually admit to certain things which aren't popular in terms of the everyday discourse between atheists and theists and whatnot, but it is popular when it comes to the online sort of sphere. Apologies, someone is trying to call me, so you can hear some noise in the background. So I'm just going to switch off my WhatsApp. All right, brilliant. So in terms of the people I'm going to be referring to, we can have a sort of discussion about the Q&A, about the various nuances, who they are and why they matter and why I refer to them. So I think one person I'd like to introduce is Michael Ruse. Michael Ruse is a well-known philosopher, an atheist philosopher, a Darwinian, card-carrying Darwinian. He wouldn't be someone that denies Darwinism. He's been in debates with theists. He's been in debates, in fact, with people who are also in the same camp as him, debating other atheists as well. So he is somebody who's had online interaction with many different people. Now, he considers naturalism as an act of faith. And why wouldn't you? Because you can't actually prove it. Ultimately, it is just a position which colors the data that you look at, the world that you look at. So what you'll find online is that you'll find various sort of interactions between him and his viewers, and the people who subscribe to his camp, and obviously the new atheists. Now, what's very interesting is when you get down and look at these top philosophers like Michael Ruse, I mean, nobody in academia would deny that Michael Ruse is an authority when it comes to naturalism, an authority when it comes to Darwinian theory, an authority generally in philosophy as a broad topic. Yet we find someone like him speaking a book which promotes naturalism, a book that does actually promote atheism. Here I'm referring to The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. He actually said that the God delusion made him embarrassed to be an atheist, right? So I just want everyone to recognize, for somebody to say, it makes me embarrassed to be a Muslim when I read a book of this particular scholar, that's a very heavy statement, especially if you're saying it in light of a dispute between, say, Muslims and Christians, or Muslims and Jewish people, or whatever. Imagine there's a live dispute going on, and you, as a Muslim, you take on somebody who's supposed to be a person of authority, some thinker, some writer, some scholar, or whatever. And that would be a very embarrassing thing in the Muslim community. You can imagine there's this big sort of hoo-ha. Yet in the atheist community, we don't really see this reaction when Michael Ruse did actually say that. And that's because a lot of the atheists follow these new atheists who academically are not on the same level as people like Michael Ruse. And obviously people like Michael Ruse are not social media savvy. They're not savvy even in terms of, I mean, for example, Richard Dawkins, love him or hate him, he's a terrific writer. He has a very lucid way of explaining concepts. He's very engaging. He gives very good examples. He tries to paint a picture from bottom up. He's a very good orator. So he has these particular skills. And of course, he is very savvy in terms of the media. We find him, making documentaries all the way back to the early 90s and 80s. And then you get people like Michael Ruse, who are way higher academically. There's various different metrics we can use to actually judge who should be higher, and he's way higher. But most people, even involved in these type of discussions between Muslims and atheists, would have no idea who Michael Ruse is. But I think it's very important. So naturalism is a position which is held by people which says that there is no God, there is no angels, there is no soul, there is no immaterial mind, there is no consciousness, right? Consciousness is basically an illusion. So they would deny all of these things. So that's naturalism. So now let's get down to the epistemic position, the position of scientism, between naturalism, between science and scientism. So we don't have a problem with science. I think this is very important to understand. As Muslims, we don't have a problem with science. In fact, 1,000 years ago, Hassan ibn Haytham, he developed the scientific method. We had a rich scientific tradition, which, by the way, common new atheism critiques of the Islamic golden era would be to say things like, oh, that's just a bunch of people in your history. It wasn't everybody. And these people are heretical, and all these types of things. But the fact is, it's very important for us to understand we had a rich scientific culture. It wasn't just a few outliners, right? It was a rich scientific culture. And that scientific culture included Muslims who we would say are orthodox. It does include Muslims who we would consider as heretical. It did actually include Christians and Jewish people and Parsis or whatever. Like, there were many different people. Parsis, I mean Zoroasters, people who believe in Zoroasterism. So there's a culture of Islam, Islam facilitating science. It's not just a few outliners. And the other thing to note is when it comes down to, say, the heretics or the people who were coming up with unorthodox ideas, people who were sometimes taking Greek Hellenistic philosophy and making it superior over divine scripture, and other people who had other heretical ideas, they were not burnt, killed. They were refuted intellectually. I think that's very important to understand. So Patricia Farah is a science historian at Cambridge. She has a fantastic book, Science of 4,000-Year History. Make sure you grab that book. You will see how it's not just about scientific culture, which Islam fostered. And David C. Limburg, another fantastic science historian, speaks about the Islamic contribution to science, scientific method, and the culture. Importantly, the culture that was facilitated by Islam. So be very careful that when you are online, you will get these common types of objections that Muslims are anti-science. No, we're not anti-science. We don't have a problem with science. The problem that we do have is with the position known as scientism. Scientism. Now, I want to give a sort of history of scientism, and then I want to break it down, inshallah. So let's look at the history of scientism, right? Now, what's important to know is that Scientism wasn't always known as scientism. And even today, a lot of people who hold on to scientism, they don't actually even call it that name. They just have certain beliefs that they hold, and we can use those beliefs to diagnose that these people are actually infected by the virus of scientism. So what is essentially scientism? Scientism is an excessive and unverified, invalid belief in the efficacy of the scientific method. It's an excessive position. It's an extremist position. It's the idea that science is basically root knowledge. Science is the main way that we gain knowledge, and science is basically rationality and science in a way are synonymous. And to be rational, you have to be scientific, and to be scientific, you have to be rational. Like, they would monopolize all of epistemology, all of the roots of knowledge, and say, no, science is the main root of knowledge. And this position, we need to look back at its history. Where did it actually? The other thing about followers of scientism is that they would obviously deny God, because they would say, well, God is not scientifically verifiable. Therefore, we don't believe in God. But they hold a lot of absurd positions when it comes to other philosophical positions. So, for example, they would actually, before we even get down to breaking down their worldview, they would actually shun and they would actually object to and reject philosophy of science, because would be, this type of abstract thinking, navel gazing, which is just absolutely useless. It hasn't produced anything. So what's important for us is to go all the way back to a time when philosophy and science were not really distinct. So if we look at the times in which obviously the Muslims, hundreds of years ago were at the forefront of science and philosophy, and then the Christian world, we find that philosophy and science was intermingled, right? And even, this is very interesting, that's not that long ago. I mean, we're just talking about 130, 40 years, right? In the Victorian era, scientists, what we consider scientists today, were not even called scientists. They were actually called natural philosophers. So philosophy and science branched away from each other as distinct disciplines relatively recently. We're talking about basically the early 20th century, which is not really that long ago, right? That's just before World War I. So Darwin himself was not known as a scientist. He was known as a natural philosopher. Newton was known as a natural philosopher. Galileo was known as a natural philosopher. These people were known as natural philosophers. So what we find is that this branching away between philosophy and science is something which cannot be ignored, because they're joint at the root. Why this is important is because the proponents of scientism do not want you to know that. They do not want you to use the philosophy of science against their worldview, which is why, while we as Muslims, we're very open about what we consider beneficial knowledge, what we consider not beneficial knowledge. And then you get these atheists saying, oh yeah, we believe in all types of knowledge, we don't have these taboos, but actually they do. In the 2011 World Atheist Conference, for which myself and a few other brothers were in attendance in Dublin, someone asked Richard Dawkins that, should they study the philosophy of science? Because obviously they look at him like a mufti, they look at him like a scholar. So, people ask him all sorts of absurd questions, even abortion and stuff like this. They look for him for guidance. So they asked him, should we study the philosophy of science? Should we study philosophy? And he said, do the science, stick to the science. And you find this as a common theme amongst these new atheists. They don't want the public to be aware of the limitations of science and the parameters of science, because that will break down their very binary and fragile narrative. So what we find is we had obviously the branching away of science and philosophy in the early 20th century. By the 1920s and 30s, there was a type of craze in the Western world about the advances being made. Remember that World War I and later on World War II, during this period, there was massive advances that were made in terms of the scientific. And there was this fascination about science and the future, and you find people who are futurists talking about what the year 2000 is going to be like, robots, cleaning up our houses, and people being able to communicate from far distances and all these types of things. Obviously the world is not as advanced as they thought it was going to be, but still it's pretty amazing. So in the 1920s and 30s, a group of influential philosophers in Vienna came together to reconstruct Western thought. And they wanted to move away from the traditions of the past, from the philosophers of the past. They wanted to make a brave new world of philosophy. And essentially what they wanted was they wanted knowledge to be defined by that which can be verified using science and mathematics, things that they could just simply show empirically. That was, or analytically, that's it. That's the only thing that they considered knowledge. So these group of philosophers, who were known as the Vienna Circle in the 1920s and 30s, they started this movement in philosophy that was known as logical positivism. Logical positivism. Now, this movement spread all across Europe, North America, Australia, the Western world, and it influenced many philosophers, many scientists, and it started obviously affecting the culture through popular TV programs, documentaries. So what happened is they didn't call it scientism at the time, they called it logical positivism. Now, what actually happened is this. Logical positivism, for reasons that philosophically failed, it failed miserably. By the 1970s, one of the main proponents, A.J. Ayer, one of the main philosophers who was pushing this, he himself admitted that it's a failed project. So what we find, and we're going to go into the reasons why logical positivism / scientism, why it fails, where we're going to go into the philosophical reasons into that. However, what we need to understand is that the ghost of logical positivism, which evolved into scientism, was popularized in the 70s and the 60s and the 80s and 90s and 2010s, and it still is popularized. And it's popularized all over the world. Academically, it's dead. Logical positivism is dead. Scientism is actually laughed at. You have very few people who try and defend the worldview of scientism. It's actually very difficult to defend, and these people are usually outliners. So what basically happened was there's a philosophical position that was launched, and the philosophical position miserably failed. And after it failed, it carried on influencing the popular culture. Now, before I get into why scientism is, incorrect, why philosophically it doesn't make any sense, I just want to highlight some things. Wherever you are in the world, you are likely to be affected by Western culture. And it's not just to do with Netflix, it's to do with the way the education system is run, it's to do with many different factors. And what we find is that it is not difficult at all to find examples of scientism being shoved in our faces, in our very homes, on our very phones, and in the schools that we've attended. So just to give you guys a few brief examples, The Big Bang Theory is a popular TV show, comedy show, and you'll find this everywhere. You travel on a plane, you'll see it there, you'll see it on Netflix. I was taking a coach from the city of Islamabad to Lahore in Pakistan, and Pakistan is a very conservative society, and religion is very much everywhere. Yet on the coach, when there was this screen that you select TV programs you can watch, The Big Bang Theory was there. The Big Bang Theory has lots of examples of their excessive belief in science. Their scientism is seeping through their script. You see it in so many examples, not only in the way that they ridicule religion, they promote Darwinism, they push out this scientific worldview, not scientific, scientistic, which is from Scientism. You also find spin-off shows like Young Sheldon. Sheldon is one of the characters, and Young Sheldon is actually a program targeted towards children, because get them while you're young, right? So Young Sheldon, you will find that scientism is being pushed out to the youth in a much more palatable way than even the Big Bang Theory. And then what you will find is that there are, which are for my young daughters, and mashallah, they always love running around and playing and do these things. But obviously, now and again, as a parent, you put on something for them to watch. And, you get these cartoons, you get these types of things, and you think to yourself, these things are harmless, right? I was shocked that one of the programs that my daughters watch is known as Peter the Rabbit, right? And it's about rabbits, and it's about fox, and it's about this, and it's about that. And I saw that they were pushing scientism. For obviously college students, this is hammered not only through popular programs. You will see this even in movies. You'll see this even in, I believe it was Batman versus Superman. There was a section there where Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's another new atheist. He came in there and he started pushing out his narrative. This is crazy if you think about it. I actually made a video on YouTube where I took out that segment where Neil deGrasse Tyson is pushing out his stuff. It was really irrelevant. Imagine I'm giving I'm giving this talk right now, and then I start talking about cryptocurrency. You guys will be like, oh, why are you talking about cryptocurrency? What's cryptocurrency got to do with this topic? It was absurd the way that Neil deGrasse Tyson brought in, his worldview. There was no reason to have him there. He's not a great actor. There's plenty of good Hollywood looking actors who are, who can perform. Why bring in a new atheist and stick him in a TV program, which, by the way, if you know about the news, if you know about the views of Neil deGrasse Tyson and the way that he dismisses and ridicules and has completely made a straw man of the Islamic positions on science, you'd be surprised that this person's not been fact checked and completely thrown out from having these types of platforms. But anyway, so you find this everywhere. So scientism is something which you have to brainwash yourself out of, right? You actually need to go through a cleansing system. So scientism, let's look at its main claims. The first claim, we can break it down into this general format, although some people would say that this is not scientism. This is a bit broader than scientism, but I think it is. So anyway, I'm just going to give it to you guys. We can get into the Q&A if there's anybody who wants to get into the nuances. So the first claim is that the main root of knowledge is science. Science is the root of knowledge, okay? The second claim is that, and sorry, the other thing which I forgot to mention is that whatever cannot be verified via science is practically not knowledge. For all intents and purposes, it is not knowledge. Knowledge is what is scientifically verifiable. The second is, obviously, science proves. Science gives certainty. Science is something that we can put our trust in as a worldview. And third, which is an implication of the first two, is that science undermines the existence of God. Science challenges the existence of God. And some have gone as far as, like Victor Stenger, the author of God, the Failed Hypothesis, right? So he literally treats the divine as a scientific hypothesis and he proves it wrong, according to him. Like, you literally get these narratives. So science is the main root of knowledge, science gives certainty, and science undermines the existence of God or disproves God, depending on how strong of a position one may hold in that camp. Okay, so let's get down to the first point, which is science being the main root of knowledge, right? Science being the main root of knowledge. Now, we can actually ask a series of questions to break down this worldview. So they would say, if something's to be rational, it has to be scientific. If something is to be believed, it needs to be scientifically verified. Science is the main root of knowledge. Now, like I previously mentioned, this is a complete break from the traditional philosophy, which was held in the Western world for well over 2,000 years, going back to the tradition of the Greeks. This breaks against the philosophy that was held in the Eastern world, the Indus Valley civilization, the various Muslim philosophers. Like, it breaks from everybody. This is how radical of a position this actually is. So whether you're, studying Eastern or Western philosophy, this is a very radical position. Now, the idea that science is the only root of knowledge can be challenged in the following way with these questions. We can ask somebody, do you believe in the existence of Genghis Khan? Do you believe in the existence of Alexander the Great? Do you believe in the existence of Napoleon? Do you believe in the Battle of Waterloo, the Battle of Manzikert? Do you believe in Cyrus, right? Cyrus the Great. Do you believe in these people? Now, the person would actually find it very difficult, and it'd be ludicrous for them to actually say, no, I don't. They will have to say yes. They will have to say, yes, I believe in these historical figures. Okay, so you believe in these historical figures, these historical events. Show me a shred of scientific evidence for our belief in these histories. There is absolutely nothing. There is absolutely nothing they can say. They can try and, and I have come across really absurd answers where people would, say all sorts of things. So, for example, someone could say, well, Genghis Khan, we can show he exists because, we can go find his grave, we can do a DNA test. But look, there are serious problems with this proposition. Firstly, for you to say we can go do a DNA test and find out about whether he existed or not using his grave and finding his bones or whatever, the first point is, right now, you have not done that test. Nobody has done that test. Yet you and I both believe he exists. So it doesn't matter what you can do in the future, if you could potentially do it. The second, obviously, practical point is, where do we know he is buried? Who buried him? Which part of the world is he buried in? Well, what we do actually know about him is that his death and his burial was something covered in secret. So we don't actually know where his grave is. We don't actually have any proof of where he was actually buried. Most historians would say somewhere around, obviously, the Mongolian region, their ancient territory, perhaps in the capital, that's basically where he's buried. However, there's nobody that can actually go and do that experiment, right? So history cannot be denied, and it's unbelievable for someone to say you cannot believe in historical events and historical figures unless it can be scientifically proven. We are rational to believe in these historical events. So this form of knowledge is known as testimony. Testimony.
دين ومكارم وأخلاق ترفعنا فوق الآفاق.
Now, in Islam, we have a phenomenal tradition. As Muslims, we have to be fair and balanced. We have to take from the West what is good. We have to take what is weak from the West and you have to try and improve it or show why Islam has a better solution. The science of testimony, and I'm using science not in the way that science is used, but as we can call it the methodology of testimony, the epistemology of testimony, essentially, is something which the Islamic world developed in a much more sophisticated way than Western history. So when it comes down to testimony, we're not saying, folk tales and legends and, okay, I heard this guy say this and therefore it's testimonial and therefore we believe it. That's a caricature. That's a straw man of what testimony means. Testimony means something which has gone through a rigorous method of verification using testimonies. So for example, we would have an isnad, we would have, is this person reliable? Did this person meet this particular person? We would have, a entire system to find out about an authentic event. Did this event actually happen? And we're not just here speaking about the Prophet ﷺ, we're speaking about even the people that he interacted with, and even the imams who came afterwards. All of those people, we have these ways of saying, okay, how do we know that this Imam Abu Hanifa did actually say this? Okay, this person met this person. Like, we have this entire thing, right? And it's very important that we realize that we actually have something very robust. And to deny testimony is essentially to deny your own reason, because testimony is so central to human knowledge that if you deny it, you don't know anything. You don't even know if the earth is actually, the people, there's these sort of fights online nowadays you get between the flat earthers and the rest of society. The flat earthers, they could simply say, well, your only reason for believing in the earth not being flat is testimony. And we would basically say yes, because if someone was to show us, the shape of the earth and say, hey, look, it's not flat, that's still testimonial, that picture could have been faked. So the thing is, knowledge is based upon testimony, and testimony takes the lion's share of knowledge, right? Most of our knowledge comes from testimony. Okay, another question that we could actually ask the person who believes in scientism is, we could basically ask them, do you believe that you had a 50th generation grandfather going back 50 generations? Now the person would say, obviously, yes. You would say to them, prove it to me using science. They can't obviously prove that. So they'll say, well, I exist, father existed, my great-grandfather existed, they all must have existed, going back, using my logic, using logical deduction. Obviously, I had a 50th generation grandfather. So that is another root of knowledge, which is logic. Logic is a root of knowledge. Science presupposes logic. Science presupposes testimony. And these are independent sources of knowledge. Okay. Another root of knowledge is mathematics, and that's obvious, and science depends upon mathematics. Also, we have metaphysics. We have beliefs that we all hold, which are rational. We believe the world is real. We believe that there is, for example, moral claims. We believe in right and wrong. We have these metaphysical beliefs. So metaphysics and the beliefs that we would say are self-evident, beliefs which are foundational, these beliefs cannot actually be proven via science. So whether it's metaphysics, testimony, logic, we can start to see there are various roots of knowledge which are not based upon science. Now, I mentioned morality, and I think morality is important here because, even the idea of these new atheists, which is, we want to do science. Why do you want to do science? Because we care about truth. You caring about truth is a value. That's a value judgment. Now, if there is no morality, if we stick to naturalism, why value truth? Why say even truth is good? Why not just be ignorant? Why not believe things that make you happy? So we can see lots and lots of problems with this particular idea that science is the main root of knowledge, and we can break it down. The Second point, and I have separate talks on these things, so I'm not going to go into in depth, but we can do that in the Q&A, inshallah. The second point about scientism, the first point is about the science is the main root of knowledge. The second point is that science gives you certainty. Now, this is just plain absurd, right? This is just plain absurd. Before this talk, I was asked by Sheikh Abdurrahim McCarthy for an example or something to give to the students. I gave him a talk I gave, which is about 2 hours, which has a lot more detail than what I'm going to go into now about why science is not absolute. Now, science is a beautiful thing, and one of the most beautiful things about science is that it changes. It's in flux. Conclusions are not written in stone. So one of the issues in science is the problem of induction. Induction is where you take a limited set of observations and you make a new inference. So you've seen 1,000 swans which are white, you write down, I've seen 1,000 which are white, you see another 1,000 which are white, you say 2,000 are white, and you make a general conclusion, all swans are white. But one day you can come across a black swan and it can challenge your theory that all swans are white. Now, this is known as the problem of induction. David Hume, the famous atheist philosopher, Scottish philosopher, he spoke about this. You get ridiculous videos online. You'll find a video in which Richard Dawkins was asked about problem of induction. The problem of induction shows that scientific conclusions can change and nothing is certain. And he tried to challenge the problem of induction by basically saying, well, if you base computers on science, they work. If you base rockets on science, they fly. If you base medicine on science, it works. And silly things. He's using induction to prove induction, which is a fallacy. But it just shows you how absurd these things are. The brother John Fontaine, actually on his channel, has a video where he breaks down the problem of induction and then when Richard Dawkins tried to challenge it and why it's wrong. So have a look for that. That's a very good video. He made that some years back. So yeah, problem of induction is very important. It shows us why science cannot be absolute. The second issue is underdetermination. Underdetermination is, okay, I'm going to try and give an example which we can all relate to. In school, we all did our charts, the XY axis, and we had these dots, and we were asked, using these dots, make a line of best inference. Some people would go like this, some people would go like this, some people would go like that. So using the same data, you can have many different inferences. That's essentially the problem of underdetermination. The problem of underdetermination is the same scientific data, this fossil, this DNA strand, this particular information that we get from bioinformatics or whatever, all of these things can give you different inferences. It's not just one theory. So that's underdetermination. The third problem is problem of unconceived alternatives. Conceived alternatives is basically, there may be inferences from the data which have not been conceived because of our cognitive limitations. We just didn't have even the theoretical framework or the conceptual framework or just the lateral thinking to come up with ideas like that. And the classic example we can get into in the Q&A is the revolution between Einsteinian and Newtonian worldview and why that was a problem of unconceived alternatives. The fourth problem is theory-ladedness. Theory-ladedness is essentially where your theory colors the data, so you become selective in terms of what you consider relevant and what you don't consider relevant. And this obviously is something which fuels confirmation bias. And the fifth problem is methodological naturalism and philosophical naturalism and the lack of distinction between the two by the new atheists. So science is based currently upon methodological naturalism, which says whatever we study, we will assume there's only natural effects, natural causes. We will not bring in anything non-natural. And atheists will use this to say, because we use this as in science, because we use methodological naturalism, therefore philosophical naturalism is true, which is what I referred to in the beginning of the talk. Now, this is a fallacy of equivocation. Massimo Piglucci, he's a philosopher of science. He's an atheist, but he himself openly says that this is the fallacy which new atheism is guilty of, including he actually says Richard Dawkins, because you'll find this in the God delusion. Oh, look at us. We're using science. We're using natural effects and natural causes, natural inferences, natural processes. Therefore, everything must be natural. But philosophical naturalism is a faith, is a system, like I mentioned before. Methodological naturalism is a lens that you temporarily put on while you're doing science. So, for example, this library that I'm in, imagine anybody, Sheikh Abdul Rahim McCarthy wanted to come into this library, and I said to him, no, Sheikh, you can't come in until you get rid of anything that's red, because no red's allowed in this room. So he takes off, maybe his watch has a little red on it, or he has a red pen or whatever. He comes in, he looks at the room and there's nothing red. Everything red's been thrown out. Then while I have that rule, nobody can walk into the room with the color red on it. While he's sitting with me and we're having coffee, I say to him, red doesn't exist as a color. And he say, that's absurd. You can't say red doesn't exist. You made a rule that you cannot mention red, or you cannot bring in something red into this room. So methodological naturalism is, if you like, on the door of science, that is the rule, that you cannot refer to anything non-natural. And that's a recent addition, right? It's not something that was always held. To go from that rule, that assumption, to the conclusion that therefore there is only nature, would be circular. Yet we find this absurd, ridiculous, actually, argument being made. And I'm not just, I'm not just going to leave you guys with saying, okay, it's just people like Richard Dawkins or the new atheists. You'll find even intelligent scientists sometimes will be using these types of arguments without realizing it. So they're doing it in a non-malicious way. Like they actually don't know what they're doing, right? But you find other, obviously, new atheists who deliberately do this. Now on to the third thing. So we broke down naturalism, then scientism, then Darwinism. Where does Darwinism fit? Now, I think the first thing to note here is this. I have a separate talk on what is Darwinism, what are its main ideas, why is it not, what are the issues and problems or whatever. But today, the talk is more conceptual and philosophical rather than going into the science. So now I want to break down a few things which are very important. If naturalism is accepted and scientism is accepted, then Darwinism is the natural conclusion. Science is, whether somebody is studying biochemistry, genetics, anatomy, psychology, linguistics, bioinformatics, anthropology, paleontology, it's irrelevant. As soon as you accept naturalism and obviously scientism, you automatically will prefer something like a Darwinian explanation for biodiversity, the biosphere. Why? The reason why is, imagine somebody is on an island, and they're on an island and they've never met another human being before, but they have cognitive abilities, they have linguistic capabilities, and they are on this island and they see all these forms of life. They see ants, they see birds, they see grass, they see all these types of things. If they believe there is no God, then they have to, by logical necessity, believe in some sort of natural explanation of life. So they will take all of these complex forms of life and say, where did they come from? They came from life, which must have been more simpler, because you can't have all this complex stuff popping out of nowhere. So they'll say, going back, life must have been a lot more simpler, and all of this happened naturally. So if there is no God, then you'd have to come up with purely naturalistic explanations. So naturalism fuels Darwinism. I think this is very important to actually highlight. And what we find is that if we go back to, say, the origin of life, which they say is some 4 billion years ago, then how did the first self-replicating molecule, the first cell, how did that come about? Well, they will have to say it had to be a very improbable event. In the words of Richard Dawkins, we just need one stroke of luck, right? One stroke of luck and we can explain the rest. So they have to, by faith in naturalism, their Genesis story, they have to believe life came from non-life. Life came from non-life. organic matter came from inorganic matter. That's an absurd idea. Now, when you're trying to talk to them about it, they'll throw you a label. They'll give a label to a mystery. They'll say, oh, we have a theory, or we have some theories in abiogenesis. Yeah, that sounds nice. What theories? What is this idea? Firstly, we can just, and this is, I think, very important, because this is a Taymian approach. What we need to do is question, okay, why assume the origination probabilities or the ideas of this happening? Like Richard Dawkins says, we just need one stroke of luck. Why assume it's very improbable? Why actually assume that? Why assume it only happened once? We can ask these types of questions, and obviously, if somebody believes there is no God, then they have to believe in abiogenesis, even if there's no evidence for it, even if it's incoherent. So the fact is, we have to understand, when it comes to the evolution of life, or when it comes to these absurd ideas in abiogenesis, these absurd ideas, the natural selection, working on random genetic material, can generate beings as complex as us, with all of our sophisticated thinking and all of the amazing technology that we actually see in the ocean, in the animals, and in the fish, and in all these types of things. All of this came about by natural selection. You have to believe in that if you actually hold on to a naturalistic view. I think to summarize this talk is what Lewontin said. Richard Lewontin just passed away recently. He was a Harvard biologist, atheist, and he has this famous statement, which is often used in these dialogues about naturalism and atheism and Darwinism and stuff. But obviously, this is linked to scientism. And he basically says, look, it is our a priori commitment to accept naturalistic causes, despite being counterintuitive or difficult to conceptualize or whatever, because they cannot a priori meaning even before evidence, even before observation, they cannot allow a divine foot in the door, right? They cannot allow anything supernatural, anything non-natural to enter the scientific domain, which is why they have to accept these types of conclusions. Now, I think it's also important to speak about Darwinism, not just in the way that the scientific theory is framed within the naturalistic paradigm, but also that, who I was referring to earlier, people like Michael Roos, who are not religious, they're atheists, and they believe in Darwinism. Even they would admit that Darwinism is not just a scientific theory. It is more than a scientific theory. He wrote this famous, well, I say famous because it's very interesting to people who are into the field, but it's not really that well known in the public sphere. He wrote a book called Darwinism as Religion, which was published by Oxford University nonetheless. And he argues in that book that actually Darwinism is not just scientific theory. From the very onset, it was more than a scientific theory, it's actually a religious perspective as well. Julian Huxley, the grandson of T.H. Huxley, who's known as Darwin's bulldog, he was an important philosopher, an atheist philosopher. He was a biologist. He was very influential in terms of the modern synthesis, the creation of neo-Darwinism, and he's just well known in the field. He believed that in the future it'll be just as absurd to believe in God as it is to believe that the earth is flat. He believed that Darwinism was a religion. He actually wrote I believe in the late 30s or early 40s, called Religion Without Revelation. Religion Without Revelation. And that book, he argues for the religion of evolutionary humanism or Darwinism. In his later book, New Bottles for New Wine, again, he makes the same sort of argument. Now, he wasn't just a random biologist working away in Europe. He was a statesman, essentially. He was the first founding president of UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And that's a prestigious organization and a prestigious position globally to actually fuel these ideas of scientism, naturalism, and Darwinism. And many of the people today who are confused, they can thank him and people like him who worked very hard in the early part of the 20th century, in the mid 20th century, to make sure that these ideas in the public culture and in the academic discourse are fused in and entrenched so that people, and this actually leads them away from religion, because explicitly you will find the likes of Julian Huxley and the later on people who want to emulate his perspective, like Richard Dawkins, openly saying that this is what they want people to do. They want people to move away from the existence of the divine. I've gone a bit over my time, so apologies for that, but inshallah we can do the question and answer session now.
Jazakallah khair, barakallah feek. It was very informative and very beneficial. Jazakallah khair. There's a few questions that have come in, but perhaps you, I think, went over some of them. If there's any other questions the brother and sister have, they can send them in now, inshallah ta'ala. I think this is a comment now that came in from the sister. It was very interesting, Spallan, when you mentioned again about the philosophy of science. I remember when we took the course with you guys at your headquarters.
Yes.
And that came up. And that's one of the things that always stuck with me from the course. The issue and about them, being so pro science, but then when and knowledge, I believe in knowledge, I believe in science. We always hear this, but then when it comes to the philosophy of science, how they they're so against it. And then what you mentioned about Dawkins' comment, just stick to the knowledge and being against the philosophy of science. That really. That was something very, very profound in it, and I think it's something, if you want to put some more light on it, like some examples of why they wouldn't want people to read in the philosophy of science. I think it's very powerful.
Sure. So I guess you can see their view about philosophy it's a general principle in life that you see people in their times of distress or difficulty, what their true colors come out, right? So in that famous debate in 2013 between Lawrence Krauss and Hamza Tzotzis, when Krauss was under a lot of pressure, when his worldview was being basically ripped apart, you find he starts attacking philosophy. And this is a common thread. You find this in these new atheists, that when push comes to shove and they're being asked, well, what about this? What about that? What about, how does this make any sense from your worldview? Give me evidence for this epistemic position. They will ridicule philosophy in general. Why? Because they know philosophy of science is the Achilles heel of their god of scientism. Their Taghut of scientism dies with philosophy. And that's why we have to shove it in their faces. That's kryptonite. That is powerful kryptonite. Just take it with you and start waving it around. And you will see that they will try to absurd ideas. The first idea is they have this love of the Enlightenment and this period where Europe moved away from religion, and they will say you guys are backwards and this and this and this. So they'll hold on to that, and then they'll also hold on to these scientism type of ideas. And then when you try and say something about philosophy, they'll say, philosophy is, forget that. But then you'll tell them, well, what the hell were these people doing in the Enlightenment? Were they not philosophers at the forefront of the Enlightenment? Were not these people that you look up to, like Galileo and Newton and much later Darwin, weren't they known as natural philosophers? So you have a contradiction. You have a contradiction in your own narrative. Your own narrative is, deifying, these great people and, the Enlightenment and rationalism and all of these advances that were made. Well, you can't have your cake and eat it, because philosophy is there staring at you in the face. If anything, philosophy was more important for the Enlightenment, because that's a broader perspective than just niche ideas on how to, find out if something's valid or not in nature. Who really cares about that? So we have to understand that the philosophy of science will break down their perspective. One way I like to think about it is this: if you have 5 minutes to, so say the building alarm goes off and there's a fire in the building and everyone has to run away. What am I going to do? I'm going to grab this laptop because it's worth a lot. I'm going to grab that camera because that's worth a lot. We have some really old books which are from, mashallah, the Adnan Rashid has a nice collection. So some of them are like 400 years old. So I'm going to get those books. Everything else that's here,
all the red books.
Yeah.
All the red books that you think with red, huh?
Yeah. So all of these books that you can get from Amazon, I'm just going to ignore them, because I know the most important point is those valuable things, and those valuable things I can carry quite easily, right? Everything else is, in a way, when the fire is going off, junk. So when it comes down to the discourse between atheists and Muslims, there is too much discussion about morality, just genes between human chimpanzees, or all this stuff. Oh, the Sharia has. Once you break down what I was discussing earlier, which is scientism, it destroys their arguments for morality, their arguments for science being certain, their arguments against God. It's that one thing that does 90% of the damage against their worldview, and it's purely conceptual. Inshallah, most of the things which I covered today, you'll remember, and I try to repeat myself with giving different examples, but it's not that difficult to actually break down an atheist worldview. They will try and win on, if you like, these side points, but on the main point, like what I began off with, which is naturalism as a faith, no atheist can ever challenge that. And they hate the word faith, and they hate being subscribed as faith believers, right? But they actually are.
That was very important. I know that's one of the notes I wrote down as well. They want to run away from that. I found that as well. The issue of faith. It's a new faith, a different faith, but it's exactly what it is. One of the questions that came through: does not the presence of the redundant appendix in the human body for ages falsify the Darwin's theory of natural selection? Do you understand that? I can.
Yeah,
send it to
the
you,
thing is, the appendix, they had this idea that is junk because Darwin couldn't find a function for it. And again, this is an example of the problem of induction. Later on, Darwin was shown to be wrong, that the appendix does have a function, especially in young adults, and also in terms of flushing into the system good bacteria. You get these things, right? It's a good example of problem induction. But I think what's important is when an atheist comes, and before we had the evidence today that the appendix is actually not vestigial, it's actually useful, right? We need to ask questions rather than looking into the scientific papers. First, we ask the conceptual questions, then we can look into his papers. The questions are, well, how do we know the science won't change? Which is what happened in this case. The appendix was shown to be useful. How do we know natural selection created it, as opposed to, alternatives, or even, the idea that vestigial organs goes against, say, belief in God? Not necessarily. That's again another assumption. So what I try and do, Sheikh, is I try and get Muslims equipped to ask questions, put shubahat in the minds of these people, because you don't even need to know the answer, which is why, and this is, subhanAllah, going to give you a lot of confidence. Any atheist comes to you with any scientific paper, maybe you read it, you haven't read it, or whatever, just ask questions. How do we know X? I was watching this video a few years ago, and, they were trying to, there was this American professor, and they were bringing in religious people. It's online. It's called, but it's I've forgotten what the name is, but there's only one documentary like this. They take people from the UK and they take them to America, and and they're practicing Christians in the UK. There's a Somali brother who is also taken on board, so he's obviously a Muslim, and they take them to all these sites. They show them these fossils, they do this, they do this, they do that. And he's trying to explain to them their perspective. And, a lot of the Christians are ill-equipped to challenge this professor. And, the Christians have done phenomenal stuff in America in terms of intelligent design and stuff, but these guys weren't equipped. But anyway, that Somali brother, and I'm going to try and find the clip and react to it on my channel, inshallah. He simply asked the professor a question. He simply asked him a question. He said, how do we know natural selection led this to that? That's all he said. One sentence. And you find the professor explodes. He's like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. And like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he was just really upset because the guy simply asked him, okay, fine, but you're saying this, but what's the evidence this led to this via natural selection? He only asked him a question. And you can see it that his whole persona of having it together fell apart, and he started getting emotional. So, it's about asking these questions, and it's irrelevant. Because today, we can use the appendix as a good example. Tomorrow, they could bring something we've never heard of. So we can't use, like I used right now, the fact that the appendix is useful and there's scientific evidence for this, but it could be that there's no scientific evidence for something else they bring up, right? So we simply have to ask the question, which is, how do we know this is the case? And how do we know it's not going to change? And how do we know that your assumptions, and by the way, these guys don't even know the assumptions. I think this is very important. Always ask people, you've given me something, what are your assumptions here? And I think that's a good way of undermining them.
Yeah, and because they call themselves, even their type of da'wah, like in the face atheist. So you have to come back with them with the same thing, using it against them, and they can't answer it. That's been seen time and time again.
Yeah.
But a lot of times people, they think, they have the science, they have the evidence, so people get nervous, they don't know how to answer. So that's the importance of these type of sessions, is getting the Muslims equipped, inshallah ta'ala. I think that's all the questions for now. Jazakallah khair. We thank you for your time. And once again, a reminder to all the brothers and sisters, we have with the Sahaba Academy weekly or monthly lectures in English as well. This is the first year we've had. We've been blessed to have a lot of our brothers who are specialists in many fields, starting with our brother Abdurrahim Green, Hamza Zortis. We had the brother who has the books there, Adnan Rashid, and who's with Subboor's in the library there with his books. Also, we had our brother Subboor this month, along with Imran Hussein, alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair. And once again, thanks our brother Subboor, may Allah bless him for taking his time. Jazakallah khair. And obviously your YouTube channel, you can tell the name for the brother, or maybe type it into the chat.
Yeah, it's just my name. Yeah. And also you can follow some of these debates on SC Dawah. SC Dawah is where Speakers Corner Dawah, where we have some of these debates and discussions. Yeah, check out that channel as well.
It's very beneficial. Jazakumullah khairan, barakallahu feek.
فلو قد ذقت من حلواه طعما لا آثرت التعلم واجتهدت ولم يشغلك عنه هوى مطاع ولا دنيا بزخرفها فتنتا.